Welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool, again welcoming you to this show where we bring you various topics and of course talk about the current affair issues around the world. We give you different perspectives, shed light on all angles to make sure that you are able to understand the stories completely. In today's show, we have three important stories that we will be taking a look at. The first one, of course, is the National Security Committee meeting in which various matters were discussed. A briefing was given to the lawmakers. It was also decided and talked upon the situation in Afghanistan and, of course, Pakistan's role in this regard, how Pakistan will continue to provide support, will do everything it can to avert any humanitarian crisis in the region, and also, of course, protect its territory and not let the Afghanistan soil be used against its territory as well. Border systems enhancement were also talked about, and other regional and security situations were discussed with various leaders of the parliament. Of course, this is an important National Security Committee meeting in which the security issues were discussed. The opposition was also taken into account, and Pakistan's stance in the way forward with particular emphasis on Afghanistan was discussed. We'll also discuss that in further detail during the show. Furthermore, we will also be talking about the summit of political elites that opens in China. This is, of course, the third such meeting, which is going to be showing the historical resolution that is going to be put forward by the Chinese Communist Party, in which the President Xi Jinping will be looking for an extraordinary third term. This, of course, will be putting him in the likes of Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping. And these, of course, leaders and what their philosophy has been, how they have put forward their resolution in the past, and what sort of a difference will Xi Jinping's political thought would make way for China's policy in the future, its interaction with the West and the international community at large. How much of this will impact China's political thought, influence the way its history is taught and depicted, is what remains to be seen. And lastly, we will also take a look at the increase in suicides and the killing of the Central Reserve Police Force by their own colleagues. We've seen a massive increase in that since 2018 to 2020. We have seen about 131 such deaths. These incidents are not new. They have been happening for a while now, with the most of these cases happening in Jammu and Kashmir. So we'll explore this into further detail as to why this continues to rise and why India does not seem to be doing anything about it. Of course, to discuss all of these topics, we have in the studios our two analysts, Mr. Farooq Batafi and Raja Faisal. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And we're also, of course, going to be joined by other experts on the show for later topics in the discussion. But first of all, let us talk about the National Security Committee meeting, which discussed the ongoing regional security situation in Afghanistan and the evolving situation there. And Pakistan, of course, has a lot of stake in this, because a peace in Afghanistan will, of course, impact the kind of peace that you experience in the region and how Pakistan's future decisions are going to be affected. So considering of course, that Pakistan is a very important stakeholder and a major player in the facilitation of the peace process in Afghanistan. It plays quite a precarious role in the entire situation. How do you see, Faisal, the fact that we need to put so much emphasis on the situation and also balance our relationship with other countries, that such meetings are extremely important into taking everybody on the same page, because we want to have a clear stance on the way forward, especially in terms of foreign policy?
Sana, it was obviously a very important meeting on the national security, and when it comes to national security right now, the situation is such where our western border, of course, Afghanistan, whatever is happening there, it is it is creating an impact on Pakistan as well. So it was related to internal as well as external security of Pakistan, but mainly external security. Why? Because if the external security of Pakistan is fixed right now, the internal matters would automatically fix with that. Obviously, Prime Minister's vision plus the current government's vision, it was necessary for the government to I think it was necessary for the government to say it to the opposition parties as well, take them in confidence, so that in coming days the decisions which are made from the government on the western border with Afghanistan and within Afghanistan, and the strategies which are being compiled over it, the opposition knows about it, and opposition is in the confidence. So right now the government, we have time and again talked about it, that government wants to ensure the economic security of the western border, of course Afghanistan, and government wants to ensure that the world comes to terms with the Taliban government, and Taliban government gets acceptance from the western side, western countries, and the world accepts them as a legitimate government of Afghanistan.
Right.
And I think that is what going on. And of course TTP, in past we have seen that it used to get help from Afghanistan, and it used to carry out terrorist activities in Pakistan. Pakistan wants to control that as well, and things are not going well in Afghanistan, looking at the facts that ISIS Khorasan as well as few of the factions of TTP, they are active against TTA, Taliban, obviously, and their government, and activities are going on. So Pakistan has such concerns, and these things needed to be talked with the opposition parties as well.
Right.
So conclusive decisions could be made.
Right, and so it seems that the lines are quite blurred in the concerns of the internal security and the external security threats that you were mentioning. And considering that, Farooq, how does Pakistan aim to proceed further, balancing both of these?
Right, Sana, thank you very much for this opportunity. Let us talk about Pakistan being a parliamentary democracy. Parliament is the cog, central cog in the entire wheel of Pakistani democracy. It is through the parliament that you build consensus, because it has representation from across Pakistan, right? Since Pakistan is emerging out of 20 years of war and terror, the fact remains that the reason why we had to actually face a lot of pushback was at the start of this war, Pakistan didn't have a parliament. So now we have a parliament. It was rightly thought that it should be briefed. This committee, parliamentary committee on national security, is very important, and that's why they were briefed, not only parliamentarians from the federation but also from the federating units.
Right.
Their heads also actually joined in, and they were briefed. Pakistan at this moment is facing four very major issues. Two concerns which are external. Faisal pointed out about the western border, but I am going to talk about the eastern as well, because Kashmir is very important, and we know what India has been doing there for quite some time. But Afghanistan, of course, because winter is coming and Afghanistan is really isolated, it is important to remember that without a peaceful Afghanistan and a stable Afghanistan, this region will always be in doldrums. That's why the briefing was very important, because the parliamentarians from were informed about the national security imperatives and how the state of Pakistan is going to meet those challenges. Then, of course, the two internal ones. TTP is important, as I pointed out, that we are emerging out of 20 years of war. So finally, you have to de-radicalize and stabilize those parts as well. And then there was another very important thing, if you remember TLP's situation. So a very interesting update happened today. When this meeting was going on, at that time, TLP also called off its sit-in from Wazirabad. So it seems that internal harmony is regaining thanks to our security calculation and management. And then, of course, when it comes to Afghanistan and Kashmir, we are actually forging ahead with consensus. So that is great news. Let us hope in coming days we see more progress, because in the end, all Pakistanis have to focus on the geoeconomics, not on geopolitics,
right,
not on other divisive issues.
Right, of course. And another thing which was important in the meeting was, of course, the fact that it was stated very clearly that it is important to Pakistan that the government in Afghanistan is representative of its people, and that we also work towards averting a humanitarian crisis. Both major steps, which don't seem really easy considering how the international community has been responding, what the concerns are, and how the direction in which Afghanistan seems to be going in. So Faisal, considering this is important to Pakistan and that Pakistan has a really extremely vital role to play, what can it really do to ensure that? Since for as of now, we don't really have an inclusive or representative government in Afghanistan. So what can we do moving forward?
Well, Sana, I'm happy that you've already mentioned that inclusiveness of the government of Afghanistan. This is the key issue which is being, remaining countries, the remaining neighboring countries, they have issues with that.
Right.
So I think if Pakistan can successfully talk with the Taliban over this, that the inclusiveness of the government of Afghanistan, if it can be ensured, then of course it would be easier for Pakistan to advocate for the government of Afghanistan in front of the Western world. And right now, if the Western world is not accepting Taliban's government as legitimate government of Afghanistan, the only issue, the only problem which can be seen is that the word inclusiveness has not been met, which was to them promised by the Taliban in Doha, and it is not being given. And if it is ensured, then of course it would be possible for Pakistan to talk with the rest of the countries, rest of the important countries of the region as well as the international world. So I am hoping that if Pakistan is successful in doing that, then the things would go a bit smoother. Plus, if we talk about the economic issues of Afghanistan, I think if Pakistan can successfully talk with China as well as Russia, that if Afghanistan can be attached to CPAC, and if CPAC can be connected with Central Asian republics through Afghanistan in coming future, then the economic situation of Afghanistan can be taken care of in the future. So I'm sure these are the things which are in the minds of people in the big offices, and they will make it possible for Afghanistan in coming years.
Right, we have to move to the next topic, but before doing that, Farooq, a quick answer on the fact that does the world really recognize the critical position that Pakistan has to play in the evolving situation in Afghanistan? It took some time for the world to realize its position in facilitating the Afghan peace process, but do they take that into account now moving forward?
Right, that is a very good question, Sana, because Afghanistan, the way things have unfolded, it seems that Pakistan is the only country that understands Afghanistan right now. So Pakistan's counsel is important, and I think the international community is actually cognizant of that. Regarding Afghan Taliban, whether it is a legitimate government or not, it is called an interim government. Whether they consider it or not, that is a separate issue. But let me tell you one thing. Unlike the last time TTA was in Afghanistan or was ruling Afghanistan, this time Afghan government or whatever passes for it is the only game in town. Last time there was Northern Alliance, which was actually considered the legitimate government. This time the president who was elected just actually resigned and walked out. After that, there isn't any other government. So what actually it does to Afghanistan is Afghanistan falls out of map, like at the UN. Who's going to represent Afghanistan? A representative of a government which is defunct now, or then nobody, or then Afghan Taliban. So these are important issues, and I think till the time you don't address this issue, and the international law, international actually Committee of Nations doesn't actually address this issue, till that time Afghanistan will be prone to more humanitarian crisis. So that is why it is important to keep on agitating this point that whosoever is in Afghanistan, you have two-way effort to make. First, to keep on, the international community interested in Afghanistan and focused on Afghanistan. Second is to keep on arguing and convincing the Afghan government, interim government, that it should be more inclusive.
Right, of course. Well, it remains to be seen what the future is going to be in Afghanistan, but there's no question that Pakistan will be an important player in the evolving situation. Moving forward, we will take a look at the situation in China and how Xi Jinping is looking towards consolidating his power, his third term in office, and what that means for China and its policies with the world at large. For this, we also have been joined by former ambassador to China, Mr. Masood Khalid, and we've also been joined by Associate Professor of History at Frostburg State University, Maryland, USA, Hyun Ma. I hope I'm saying your name right, but thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sana. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So let's talk about a little bit about what this means, this meeting that is called the plenum, and what it means for China, how President Xi Jinping's position as the president for the third time in the office is going to impact the way he is viewed. We already have Xi Jinping thought as a political ideology that had been put forward before. How will this change the way China's history is looked at from now onwards? Mr. Hyun?
Yes, and I think this is a very important conference for the Chinese Communist Party, especially for President Xi Jinping. Of course, this is like a preparatory conference for next year's party's Congress. So that's why it basically set up tones for Xi Jinping and Chinese Communist Party. So that's why you need to discuss the past achievement, experience, and of course, basically try to justify, legitimize the Chinese communist rule, especially Xi Jinping's personal rule. So that's why I think for both Xi Jinping and the CCP, this is pretty important.
Right, and of course, considering the fact that this is going to be the third such resolution that is going to be put forward after, of course, the one that was put forward by Mao Zedong in 1945 and then in 1981 by Deng. And we've seen what the reasons were for that. Of course, Mao established himself as a true leader, and then we had Deng coming in and salvaging the party and talking about the failures of the previous leader. What does this resolution mean for Xi Jinping? What is the purpose that is being propagated forwards or advocated or talked about? How is this going to be encompassed in the resolution? Mr. Masood Khalid?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. As Professor Ma has just said, I think this conference is very important, which is going on in Beijing right now. This is the meeting of the Central Committee, and it is a prelude to the forthcoming party congress, next year in March, which is held after every 5 years. Now, China is at a stage where it has achieved what it calls the target of, building a moderately prosperous society. It is now a country which is second largest economy and enjoys a per capita income of more than $10,000. But the CCP, the Communist Party, has, fixed more ambitious national targets of national rejuvenation. And that is by 2049, China will become a fully modern and developed society. So stage by stage, one by one, China is, trying to reach those targets. At this point in time, China is sort of balancing its, process of national development, not going back to the era of Chairman Mao Zedong, which was a centralized economy, and not going forward to a point which leads a society to a completely capitalist society. So it is a system which is Chinese, which is socialism with Chinese characteristics. So this is a balance. And the CCP is right now in the midst of a reform process, a rectification process. Because, when 1981, you mentioned the resolution which was passed by Deng Xiaoping, that was the time when modernization and reform process had started, reversing what had happened in preceding years of Chairman Mao's rule, Cultural Revolution and Great Leap Forward, this and that. So in 1981, the party did introspection and also sort of uh, criticized the errors and the mistakes which were made by at the time of Chairman Mao. And then China moved on from 1978-79 onwards on this reform process. And today, China is where it is. President Xi Jinping was elected as the core leader of the party. The party has decided that right now China needs his leadership. So the limit on a two-tenure presidency has been sort of abolished. And the next year, this resolution, which is going to be passed, is sort of setting the stage for the National Congress, which will take place next year, which will endorse President Xi Jinping's, core leadership for next so many years. For the time being, he has been, he has been elected as the president for life. So I think China is at a very critical stage. There are challenges, there are problems, and there are many opportunities. China has already made a mark, on international scene, on international horizon. So from now on, I think China wants to move on.
Right, I understand that China is, of course, looking ahead, and there's a lot of emphasis on the future and how vastly they have progressed compared to previous political leaders and what China used to be. But it is my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there's still a lot of emphasis on history, and China continues to somehow tie its future with its past as well. How do they sort of plan to achieve that by bringing forward this resolution and putting forward Xi Jinping? I understand there's going to be a lot of talk about the achievements and historical context, and especially with regards to what Xi Jinping has achieved. But how does that tie down to the party's achievements over the years and link it with the future that China sort of tries to inspire towards? Mr. Faisal?
Sana, one very important thing I wanted to highlight here, that Central Committee of Chinese Communist Party, they always had a plan, and they always work with their own plan. And the leadership they have right now, they want a continuity to that leadership, because they know that their plans are, they require his leadership. President Xi's leadership. Under the President Xi's leadership, they have set their goals and they want to achieve them in coming years. First of all, I've put some down as internal economic expansion. First of all, they want to expand their own internal economy. They want to expand it. If we look at today's China, 70% of the population lives in the eastern China, the eastern border side of China. Why? Because traditionally, East China Sea used to be important for the whole China. Why? Because this is where the all economic activity used to happen. So majority of the population, the 70% of the population lives on that side, the central plus the eastern side. But if we look at the western side of China, the remaining remaining population of China was always scattered there, and you would see very less opportunities in terms of economic growth, economy. So this is why we saw projects like BRI and then CPAC, just to connect the western side with Pakistan, with the western countries and Europe. And why they wanted to do it? Because they wanted to create jobs, create economic activities, create economic growth on the western side as well, so that the population which is focused on the eastern side, it can be divided in whole China. And of course, from the South China Sea through CPAC, they can connect with throughout the world. So they wanted to balance the things. If we talk about the external economic influence, well, in recent years, we have seen that China has expanded its economy throughout the world, in Africa, in Latin America, in Pakistan, in Europe. Everywhere, China is reaching out everywhere just to expand its economy. And I think their economic endeavors, in terms of the external economic endeavors, they want to expand them. And all of this, it requires sort of continuity to whatever President Xi has implemented in China right now. So that's what I believe,
Right.
that the party has decided already that they want to have President Xi as president for a long time.
Right, the spotlight is of course on President Xi Jinping, but what I want to understand is that are we sort of making the mistake of minimizing the achievements of the party by focusing just on President Xi Jinping, or is that something that has happened, that has always been the way in China, and the fact that the person of Xi Jinping, of course he's been talked about as the core leader as well, there is Xi Jinping thought, is that an integral part of what China wants to put forward? Farouk?
Right, fascinating question, and let me hijack the previous question you put to Faisal, because that was also really exciting one. Connecting history with the future is very important. Remember that China is a socialist country, and by virtue a socialist with Chinese characters, of course, characteristics. But when you talk about history, it is essential to remember that China sees everything as a progression of idea. And the first, they say, Mao unified the country. Before Mao, the country was really divided, and you never had a very comfortable unifying force at the center. After Mao, they say that Deng actually made China rich. And now Xi Jinping is going to make China strong. So this there is a continuity and progression that you can see. But having said that, remember that China has had both high points in history, and there were some sad chapters as well. Cultural revolution and Great Leap Forward, they both have a darker side as well. But China is one country that has been learning a lot from its past. And I think that that journey continues. As to whether Xi Jinping is one individual versus a party, or is he a continuation and summation of that party, is very important to understand. The Communist Party of China, or CPC as it is called, is the most important cultural element and political element in China, and it actually sets all the agenda. But its leader is also very important. Because of Mao and Deng, there is this tradition that people who are great leaders can really take the country far ahead. So at this moment also, but remember, while we keep on talking about Mao Zedong, and then Deng Xiaoping, and now Xi Jinping, there are two other people who really contributed immensely to the country's betterment and progress. One is Jiang Zemin, and the other one is Wen Jiabao. Both of these gentlemen, one the president and one prime minister, actually improved the economy a lot by introducing the idea of three represents, where they also included their own characteristic capitalism as well. At this moment, it seems that a very boisterous debate is going on, how to change China's context and how to improve its direction. Internally also, there have been cultural changes of late we have seen, and there have been some regulation of big businesses as well. So we still have to see how this whole story unfolds. But I know one thing for sure, seeing its progress, that China will keep on progressing and improving itself.
And of course, this is a historical resolution, and it will be an important milestone in the history of China, which of course is going to be then taught to the new Chinese generation that is coming on. Mr. Haiyan, the fact that this is going to form an important part of the Chinese political thought as well in the future, and also part of Chinese identity, whether or not the party actually was successful in achieving China dream, so to speak. How do you think that this resolution is going to impact in the way that Chinese will identify themselves both as part of the country and the party?
Well, I think if you look at all this previous resolution, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, of course, as ambassador and other scholars just mentioned, since 1945, you not only have, strongmen like Mao Zedong, according to CCP propaganda, CCP saved China, right? And of course, Mao Zedong is the pivotal, individual. Then you have the Deng Xiaoping, who basically enriched the Chinese. So that's why strongman Deng Xiaoping also played a very important role. So now it's really interesting because when you look at all these, resolutions, when you look at all these conferences, you always have organizational level. You talk about CCP's contribution, historical achievement. That's very standard, propaganda from 1970s to today, right? 1980s to today. At the same time, you have individual, ambition. You have, Mao Zedong, purged other, leaders. Then you have Deng Xiaoping, re-evaluated Mao Zedong. Now, of course, you established Xi as the core leader. So that's why you have individual level as well. You have kind of, power realignment, if you will. And also, when you talk about this resolution, which we really don't know at this moment, but you can imagine today's world is very much, if you look at United States, India, very much majoritarian populism. Now, what does it mean? What's the implication for China, CCP, Xi Jinping, which basically means you need to appeal for the majority population, which means in China, Han Chinese. That's why you need to sanitize non-Chinese, non-Han people. You need to control these big capitals, companies. You need to control basically everything. So that's why here, when most scholars, Chinese friends, basically agree that this is a kind of continuation, progressive. To some extent, I think that's true. But I really don't think this kind of linear development. For example, to many people, Deng's era is kind of golden era. You cannot have big companies today that can really achieve as much as they did in 1990s, 2000, So that's what you can imagine. This is both a opportunity for Chinese people and also a challenge for Chinese people, especially in the context of U.S.-China competition, especially when you experienced such a high economic growth during Deng's era. So how can you expect the next, Chinese, how can you materialize, for example, Chinese dream? How can you achieve the total, prosperous society?
Right,
And
right.
yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hayun, for those words. Mr. Masood, I'll just end with you. Your concluding thought on the matter and the fact that whether or not this resolution is going to have any significant impact in the way China deals with the international community at large, specifically with the West. Of course, there's no real policy coming out of this resolution, but will it have an impact, or do you think it just consolidates the position that China currently holds?
Well, 2 points I want to make. I think it has been a very useful discussion so far. First of all, Chinese decision making is rooted in the philosophical moorings and it has a historical context. This is a general pattern of the decision making in China. Secondly, the perception of the Communist Party of China is that China is right now at the cusp of a takeoff. So China needs continuity, and China needs a leader who is kind of a pivot around him. The entire process of national development takes place. Now, China does not want to squander the gains it has made in the last 40, 45 years. It was a very poor country, and now it is, a rich country in relative terms. So China does not want to squander these gains, and it is also aware of the external pressures and the challenges which are being deliberately raised in order to scuttle China's rise. So from that standpoint, China wants peaceful development. That is I would say that is a strategic choice of China's foreign policy. China does not want to ruffle feathers at this point in time. It is bolstering its economic and defense capability, but it is not for offensive purposes. It is for self-defense.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you very much, Mr. Masood Khalid. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I'll have to interrupt you there. Thank you very much for joining us, and Mr. Hayun for being with us on the show. We just have a little time to talk about the situation in India, considering, of course, how suicide rates are rising in the CRPF. We also, of course, have the issues concerning the shooting of colleagues, and, of course, 131 such incidents had been reported in the past year alone. So we, of course, have this situation, which is not new, something which has been happening for a while now. But whether or not there's something extraordinary about it and what needs to be done about it is what I think we should be discussing in the show today. For this, we have been joined by foreign affairs expert Mr. Kamar Chima, and also defense analyst Major retired Adil Raja, who's also with us online. We will try and establish our contact with both of these guests and get them online on board with the show to continue our discussion. I'll start with you, Farokh, at the moment before we are joined by the guests. Yeah. Considering, of course, that this situation has been going around for a while now, and the fact that any situation in which there needs to be a military presence is there, or a law and order situation needs to be controlled, there is a long-term presence of forces. It's an extremely stressful situation. Right. Do you think that this is something, or the rate at which this is happening, is normal in terms of incidents around the world, or is there something extraordinary about what's going on in India, specifically in Jammu and Kashmir?
Right, Sana, it is very important story, and it is unfortunately one story that has been festering over the years. One, in Kashmir, especially because these people are asked to be cruel. That also actually really hurts their soul and breaks their soul. But let me remind you of 2019 confrontation between India and Pakistan. At that time also, who was actually mentioned as the reason why there was confrontation? People from this force who died in one terrorist activity. It wasn't more than 30 people. But over the years, we have seen 130 people actually committing suicide. Around that time, we also saw a video coming from Indian soldiers that showed what kind of food they were given and the kind of demoralization they were facing. Unfortunately, India might be big on theatrics because it eventually has to make films and it has to land in Bollywood. But regarding humanitarian conditions, the kind of work these people are put to and the kind of treatment they get, both are really, really sad. So that's why this number has been increasing. Humanitarian organizations kept on pointing it out, but then Indian government decided that it cannot tolerate organizations like Amnesty. They expelled them. And amazingly, if any other country would have done something of that sort, it would have been center stage on the international media's attention. Right. Unfortunately, India can get away with whatever it wants.
Right, unfortunately, we've seen that happen. We've also been joined by a defense analyst, now Major Adil Raja, and foreign affairs expert Kamar Chima. Both of the gentlemen have joined us on the show. Thank you very much for being a part of the debate. I'll start with you, Mr. Adil. Considering the fact that suicide rates have gone up, incidents of shooting by colleagues have gone up in the CRPF, we've seen India turning a blind eye to these cases. We understand how and why the Modi regime is treating its minorities, especially Muslims in India, but how is it justifying such incidents and the fact that these continue to happen without any real notice being taken by the authorities?
You see, it's not an isolated incident. It's not something which is happening occasionally. It is an ongoing, persistent issue in the Indian Armed Forces. And now let me tell you that as per the data of the Indian Armed Forces itself, as per the data of the Ministry of Defense of India, every third day, mind you, every third day, a soldier of the Indian Armed Forces gets killed in an incident of suicide or fratricide. Now, since it's an ongoing issue, the Indian Army officers have been conducting their own studies to explore the reasons behind this persistent issue. Since Indian Armed Forces is right now third, a soldier getting killed every third day means that it is the highest ratio of suicide and fratricides in an armed force, in a regular armed force, all around the world. India is leading in that. Now, Indian Army Major General Samir Ram wrote a book about this particular issue. He conducted his own research. He was a general officer who has commanded fighting formation, and he was a very well-mannered officer. He's written many books, and he's an Indian Army journal. He conducted his own research, and he found out that the soldier of Indian Armed Forces is different from what the soldiers were in the yesteryears. We are living in an information age, and this information age, he says, has put socio-economic pressures on the Indian soldiers to perform well. And then he also acknowledges that there are certain hidden causes as well, which is causing an increase. And every year, mind you, the suicide and the fratricide rate in Indian Army is increasing every year. Now, every third day a soldier gets killed. It's not a normal thing. So, General Samiram in his book concluded that socio-economic reasons and battle fatigue is to be blamed. However, he failed to, rather deliberately or unconsciously, he failed to mention the cost on the conscience of these soldiers. You see, a soldier who is fighting for a national army considers
Right.
himself a hero. He wants to be considered a hero. That is not the case in India. There are 21 freedom movements, small, medium, large freedom movements beckoning for support in India right now. And the cost of running this apartheid, Brahman-led apartheid, I would like to call it, of the Hindutva fascist rule, the Indian armed forces and the emissaries, they are the tools or in the hands of Hindutva establishment being exploited to run the rule, the Hindutva rule in India. Now that is taking a huge toll on the conscience of these soldiers who want to see themselves as heroes, but no, they are being told on regular basis in Kashmir, no majority, let me tell you on record that majority of these suicidal fratricides are in Indian held Kashmir. Now, the people of Indian held Kashmir, starting from a small child up to an elderly person, would tell an Indian soldier posted over there, the majority of Indian armed forces is posted in Indian held Kashmir, that you are an oppressor. And just that conscious, the cost of the conscience of these soldiers is making them commit
Right,
suicide and
right.
that is
Of
an
course,
article in
if that
BBC.
is so, Mr. Chima, considering the fact that this is in line with the Hindutva fascist regime, this is in line with the fact that there is a Hindu first order in India, that they are talking about how a certain ideology or a certain faith is more important. If this is in line with that, and the soldiers are actually their heroes, then why aren't they being treated as such?
Well, I think the biggest problem which has happened since 2014 is the politicization of Indian armed forces. So this happened when General Bipin Rawat, who was basically elevated to the position of CDS, and that's where it all started. One thing. The second thing is that we have seen that India is trying to enhance. Although Indians think that the biggest challenge for them is an internal security, so be it the Naxalites, be it the Kashmiris, or be it the others, the Indian armed forces, they are really facing a challenge because they, as Raja was mentioning, that this is a war fatigue as well. So they have to fight with the Kashmiri Mujahideen, they have to fight with the Naxalites. So the major internal political consensus has not been established, and the New Delhi wants to bring changes through force and through making changes from the strategic level and not involving the locals. So in reality, India is going to be the part of the Quad. India is trying to go with the global powers, but they are bleeding from internally. And the way the Indian army had to behave, they had to act at the line of actual control. I think one of the reasons India is trying to invest more on information technology is that their armed forces are not responding to the threats the way they should have responded, be it the line of control or be it the line of actual control. So recently, they are buying more drones from Israel and enhancing their capabilities because they believe that the armed forces have been badly exposed very recently, be it the LOC, because on LOC they keep on blaming that this is that there is an infiltration, the Kashmiris are entering from LOC. On the other hand, they
Right.
are blaming Chinese, but it is basically the failure of the manpower.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chima. Faisal, I'm really short on time, so just a quick comment on the fact that if the international community continues to put a blind eye to so many of the humanitarian crises in the world, is just another one of those cases, or is this something that we are collectively sort of desensitized towards the plight of soldiers and armed forces around the world?
Sana, very quick comment. I would simply say that Qamar Chima, the way he has put right at the end, I think that is what the crux of the whole trouble is. If we look at the Indian forces right now, there is, institutional deficiencies. They are not paying them well. They are not feeding them well, as my worthy colleague Farokh has mentioned earlier. And what they need to do is, rather than spending too much money on procurements, the heavy budgeted procurements where all of these, all of these politicians, they get kickbacks. I think rather than spending multi-billions in that procurements, they need to take care of their soldiers. They need to take care of their soldiers.
Right.
I mean, even we being the enemies, I mean, they consider us enemy. We don't like it when it happens to them.
Yeah.
Absolutely, of course, because we're all for humanity and we want to make sure that everybody is treated fairly. And of course, this is extremely important to people around the world and to soldiers and armed forces around the world as well. We continue to strive towards peace and well-being for people of all faith, all religion, and anywhere in the world as well. That's all we have time for. Thank you so much for watching. Take care and Allah Hafiz.